Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The storm had been brewing all afternoon. The air had that thick, oppressive weight to it, the kind that made everything feel just a little more still, a little more electric. I had noticed the sky darkening through my kitchen window as I washed dishes, the usual golden hues of the late afternoon sun replaced by an eerie gray-green cast. I sighed, wiping my hands on a towel. Storms were nothing new in our little town, but this one felt different. The wind had started picking up in violent bursts, rattling the windows of my small house. The weatherman had warned about possible power outages, but I wasn't too concerned. I had candles, flashlights, and enough food to last a few days if needed. As I moved to close the curtains, a flash of movement outside caught my eye. It was my neighbor, Daniel. He was securing the patio furniture on his porch, his strong frame moving quickly as he fought against the wind. Daniel had moved in a little over a year ago, and though we had exchanged polite conversations here and there, I didn't know much about him. He was quiet, a little mysterious, but always kind. I watched as he struggled to tie down a chair that had already been knocked over by the wind. For a moment, I considered going out to help him, but before I could decide, a low rumble of thunder rolled through the sky, vibrating deep in my chest. I shivered and stepped away from the window. As the storm intensified, the rain began hammering against the roof in a relentless downpour. I turned on the television for background noise, but the flickering lights told me the power wouldn't last much longer. Sure enough, a few minutes later, everything went dark. I grabbed my flashlight and took a deep breath. I had always been independent, never one to rely on others, but something about the darkness, the raging wind outside, made me feel uneasy. Then, just as I was debating whether to curl up with a book or try to get some sleep, there was a knock at my door. A knock. In this weather? I hesitated for a second, my heart beating a little faster. Who could possibly be outside in this storm? Gripping the flashlight tighter, I made my way to the front door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, rain-soaked and breathless. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, his clothes clinging to his body, drenched from head to toe. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said over the howl of the wind, "but I think my house is flooding. The water's coming in fast, and He exhaled sharply, his shoulders tense. I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, I just stared at him. The idea of him, this strong, capable man, coming to me for help was something I hadn't expected. "Come in," I said quickly, stepping aside. He hesitated, then nodded, shaking off some of the rain before stepping inside. I closed the door behind him, locking out the chaos of the storm. His presence filled the space immediately. The scent of rain and earth clung to him, mixing with the faint trace of whatever soap he used. I handed him a towel, and he took it with a grateful nod, running it over his face and through his wet hair. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice softer now that we were out of the storm's direct grip. He let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "Honestly, I don't know. One minute I was watching the rain, and the next my back door was blown open and water started pouring in. I tried to stop it, but it was too much." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "I hate to impose, but would it be okay if I stayed here for a while?" Something in his voice, in his eyes, made my chest tighten. I had lived alone for years, kept my world small. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't turn him away. "Of course," I said. "Let me get you some dry clothes." As I walked to my bedroom to find something for him to wear, I realized how strangely calm I felt. Despite the storm, despite the unexpectedness of it all, having him here didn't feel like an intrusion. If anything, it felt right. When I returned with an old sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants that had once belonged to my brother, Daniel was standing in my living room, his gaze fixed on the flickering candle I had lit on the coffee table. "Here," I said, holding out the clothes. "They might be a little big, but at least they're dry." He took them with a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you. Really. He gestured toward the hallway, silently asking where he could change. I pointed to the bathroom, and he disappeared inside. As I waited, I found myself staring out the window again. The storm was still raging, the wind howling like a living thing. But inside, the house felt warm, safe. When Daniel returned, his damp clothes now replaced with the dry ones I had given him, I couldn't help but notice how different he looked. More relaxed, more vulnerable somehow. "You okay?" he asked, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I nodded, offering a small smile. "Yeah, it's been a long night." He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Tell me about it." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Do you want some tea?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised. Then he smiled. A real smile. One that softened his usually serious expression. "I'd love that." As I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle with water, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe the storm wasn't just outside. Maybe it had been inside me all along. And maybe, just maybe, Daniel was the calm I hadn't known I needed. The storm raged on outside, the wind rattling the windows, the rain hammering against the roof like an urgent whisper of the night. But inside, in the quiet warmth of my kitchen, things felt different. I moved with practiced ease, filling the kettle, setting out 2 mugs. It was something so simple, something I'd done 100 times before. But tonight it felt like more. Maybe because I wasn't alone. Daniel stood nearby, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He had his arms crossed, his posture still carrying the weight of night's chaos. But there was something softer in his eyes. Something I hadn't noticed before. "You keep a very cozy home," he said after a moment, his voice quieter than usual. I glanced over my shoulder, offering him a small smile. "Well, when you live alone, you tend to make things as comfortable as possible." He nodded as if he understood, but there was something lingering in his gaze. "Have you always lived alone?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "I was married," I admitted finally. "A long time ago." Daniel straightened slightly, as if he hadn't expected that answer. "Oh, I didn't know." I let out a small chuckle. "Not something I advertise. It's been over 10 years now. We divorced, and I never really thought about trying again." I turned to face him fully, shrugging. "I guess I just got used to my own company." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "I get that." There was something in his tone, something that made me curious. "What about you?" I asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "Married once. Didn't last." He glanced down at the floor, as if weighing his words carefully. "We were young. Thought we had forever. Turns out we didn't." The kettle whistled, cutting through the silence. I turned back to pour the water, giving him space. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked as I dropped a tea bag into his mug. He let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Not the marriage itself, just the way it ended." I nodded, understanding all too well. We fell into an easy silence as we sipped our tea, the warmth spreading through me in more ways than one. Outside, the wind howled, and I was reminded of how unpredictable life could be. "You know," Daniel said after a while, setting his mug down, "I didn't expect to end up here tonight." I let out a soft laugh. Neither did I. His gaze met mine then, something unspoken passing between us. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The storm had finally started to ease, but the world outside still felt unsteady. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, the occasional gust of wind making the house creak. Yet inside, everything was still, a fragile kind of quiet settling between Daniel and me. I wasn't sure what had changed exactly. Maybe it was the way he lingered in my kitchen, fingers curled around his half-empty mug as if reluctant to leave. Maybe it was the way his gaze held mine just a little longer than necessary, the warmth in his eyes something I hadn't seen in a long time. Or maybe it was me. I wasn't used to sharing my space like this. My home had been mine alone for so long that having someone else here, especially a man, felt almost foreign. And yet it didn't feel wrong. I exhaled softly, resting my hands on the counter. "Looks like the worst of it is over," I said, nodding toward the window. Daniel glanced outside, his jaw tightening slightly. "Yeah, probably safe to head back soon." I should have felt relieved. The storm had passed. The power would return soon. Everything would go back to normal. But instead, an odd sort of disappointment settled in my chest. "You don't have to rush," I found myself saying before I could think better of it. He turned to me, surprised. "You sure?" I shrugged, offering a small smile. "It's still pretty late. Roads are probably a mess. Besides..." I hesitated, then let out a soft laugh. "I guess I wouldn't mind the company a little longer." His lips twitched in a half-smile. "Well, if you put it that way." We drifted back to the living room, the flickering candle casting warm shadows across the walls. It felt intimate in a way I hadn't expected. Not forced or awkward, but in the quiet, unspoken comfort of 2 people who understood something about each other. He sat back on the couch, stretching his legs out slightly. "I never really noticed how quiet things get when the power's out," he murmured. I chuckled, settling into the chair across from him. I kind of like it. Makes you slow down. Think. He nodded, but his gaze was on me now. What do you think about? I hesitated, then sighed. A lot of things. Life. Time. How quickly it all moves. I met his eyes. How sometimes you don't realize you've been holding your breath for years until something, or someone, reminds you to exhale. The words were out before I could stop them, and for a moment, I worried I'd said too much. But Daniel just held my gaze, something thoughtful, maybe even knowing, flickering across his face. Yeah, he said quietly. I get that. A comfortable silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't something that needed to be filled. And as the storm faded into the distance, I realized something unexpected. Tonight, I didn't feel alone. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to be. The storm had passed, but the air inside the house still felt charged, as if the quiet aftermath of the night carried a sense of something unfinished. The rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered, cloaking the world outside in a soft, muted glow. We sat there in the dim light, neither of us rushing to speak or move, as if the evening had stretched the boundaries of time itself. Daniel broke the silence first, his voice low, careful. You've been through a lot, haven't you? I felt a ripple of emotion stir in my chest. His words weren't judgmental, but understanding. It was as though he saw something in me that I hadn't fully realized myself. I guess I have, I said softly, leaning back in my chair. I didn't always know how to let go, how to trust again. I think I was afraid of what might happen if I did. Daniel nodded, his expression softening. I get that. I think we all carry some fear like that. Fear of what we've lost, what we've been through, and what might never be the same again. I met his eyes, surprised by the quiet vulnerability in his voice. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of his words settling between us, quiet but profound. You don't have to be afraid, he continued, his tone more gentle now. Sometimes it's about learning to let things in again. Slowly, trusting that not everything has to be the same to be worthwhile. I wanted to respond, but the words felt too fragile, too tender for the moment. Instead, I simply nodded, feeling something shift inside me. Something I couldn't quite name, but something that felt like a promise. Daniel stood up then, stretching his arms above his head. Well, I guess I should get going. The storm's over, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. I stood too, surprised by the sense of reluctance that tugged at my chest. You don't have to go if you don't want to, I said, my voice more tentative than I intended it. He paused, looking over at me with a strange intensity. Are you sure? I met his gaze, something warm and unspoken passing between us. I'm sure. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to my surprise, he walked over and stood beside me, his presence steady and reassuring. There was something different in the way he looked at me now, something more open, more sincere. I'm glad I came over tonight, he said quietly. I didn't expect any of this. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. But I'm glad I did. I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the storm or the power being out. It was a simple, unexpected moment of connection. You're welcome anytime, I said softly, my voice steadier than I expected. He nodded, then reached for the door. I'll see you around then. As he stepped outside into the lingering mist of the evening, I watched him disappear into the dim light of the street lamps. The door clicked shut behind him, and the quiet in the house returned. But this time, it wasn't the kind of silence I'd known before. It was a silence filled with possibility, with something new. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of the night settle around me. The storm had passed, and the air was clearer now. And so was I. Maybe life didn't always go the way we planned, but sometimes it had a way of surprising us when we least expected it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was ready for whatever came next.